The surgeon's confusion. The British naval surgeon watches a Maori warrior lift a 200-pound boulder that two of his soldiers couldn't budge. This shouldn't be possible. These people have no wheat, no cattle, no proper agriculture. Yet they're outperforming his well-fed European troops in every physical measure. He's been in New Zealand 3 weeks. Everything he learned about nutrition at Cambridge is proving wrong. Yesterday, he attended a hangi feast. He watched them dig a pit, arrange heated stones with geometric precision, and layer food in a specific order he didn't understand. They covered everything with earth and walked away. 6 hours later, they unearthed bundles of fish that fell apart at the touch, flesh more tender than anything from his ship's galley. Vegetables cooked perfectly through, not a flame in sight, not a single piece of metal cookware. His confusion deepens when he examines the Maori people themselves. They averaged 3 inches taller than his crew. Stronger, better teeth. No signs of scurvy, rickets, or the nutritional deficiencies plaguing European cities. The textbooks said civilized eating required 3 things: grain, domesticated livestock, and metal cookware. The Maori had none of these. The textbooks were wrong. What Europeans missed. European settlers arrived expecting to find people barely surviving. They saw no wheat fields and assumed ignorance. They saw no cattle and assumed poverty. They saw cooking methods without metal and assumed primitiveness. They missed everything. The Maori hadn't spent centuries just eating whatever they found. They'd built a complete food system optimized for New Zealand's unique environment through systematic observation. Which plants were edible? Which parts? When to harvest for maximum nutrition? How to neutralize toxins? How to preserve for winter? This was practical science conducted over generations. Take the hangi. Europeans saw a hole in the ground. Maori engineers saw thermodynamics. Heat stones to precise temperatures too cool and food stays raw. Too hot and it burns. Layer food strategically. Roots at the bottom where heat is most intense. Delicate fish near the top. Cover with specific plants that add steam and flavor. Seal with earth to maintain temperature. The method preserved more nutrients than boiling. Required no fuel beyond the initial fire. Could feed 200 people simultaneously. Europeans cooking over open flames were burning food, wasting heat, losing nutrients to ash and smoke. The primitive method was more advanced than European campfire cooking. But the real sophistication lived in what happened between harvests. The science of not starving. A Maori pataka storage house looks like a simple shed on stilts. European settlers saw quaint architecture. Engineers today see climate-controlled warehousing designed centuries before refrigeration. Elevated to avoid ground moisture. Oriented to catch prevailing winds. Gaps in walls positioned for airflow that prevents mold. The structure naturally maintains 12 to 15 degrees Celsius with 60% humidity. Those are the optimal conditions for storing Kamara sweet potato for up to 6 months. The Maori had figured this out through observation. Build it this way, food lasts longer. Build it that way, everything rots by March. They couldn't explain it in terms of temperature regulation and humidity control. They didn't need to. The buildings worked. Their drying techniques showed equal precision. Europeans thought drying was simple: leave food in the sun until hard. The Maori understood that different drying temperatures and durations produce different results. Sun-dried versus smoke-dried. Fast-dried versus slow. Each method created different flavors, textures, and storage characteristics. This wasn't random. It was food science developed through generations of testing. This fish dried this way keeps for 3 months. That fish dried that way keeps for 8. Fermentation techniques preserved foods while improving digestional value. The Maori didn't know about beneficial bacteria and probiotics. They knew that food prepared certain ways made people feel better and lasted longer. Sometimes the observation comes before the explanation. The Kamara problem. When European settlers tried farming in New Zealand, they planted crops using methods that worked perfectly in England. Everything died. They watched Maori cultivate Kamara sweet potato and initially dismissed it as primitive farming. Just digging and planting, right? Wrong. Kamara requires specific conditions that don't naturally exist in most of New Zealand. So the Maori engineered growing environments. They created raised beds with specific soil compositions, mixing sand and compost in ratios that took generations to optimize. They built windbreaks protecting young plants from salt air. They developed storage pits maintaining optimal temperature and humidity through winter. After their third failed crop, European settlers started asking Maori farmers for advice. The primitive methods worked. European agricultural science didn't. Strategic eating. A British naturalist spent 2 years documenting Maori fishing practices. His journal reveals his growing astonishment. The Maori had detailed knowledge of fish behavior, migration patterns, and seasonal variations. They knew which fish were where, when they'd arrive, and how to catch them efficiently. They developed specialized tools for different fish in different conditions. The nets weren't simple weaving. Different mesh sizes for different fish. Different materials for different water conditions. Different designs for different depths. Each net represented generations of optimization. But here's what shocked him most. The Maori had a seasonal food calendar that optimized nutrition year-round. They didn't just eat whatever was available. They planned harvesting to ensure nutritional variety across all seasons. Certain fish in summer when fat content peaked. Specific plants in autumn before nutrients declined. Preserved foods bridging winter. Fresh crops in spring. This required understanding not just what was edible, but what nutrients different foods provided and how to combine them for complete nutrition. The Maori didn't have textbooks about vitamins and minerals. They had centuries of observation about what combinations kept people healthy, strong, and capable of lifting boulders that left European soldiers embarrassed. The bird question. The Maori hunted birds strategically, harvesting specific species at specific times when fat content was highest. They understood seasonal variations in nutrition that European hunters didn't consider. A bird caught in spring had different food value than the same species caught in autumn. Harvest timing mattered. They also had regulations. Rawi temporary bans on harvesting specific resources allowed populations to recover. Europeans saw these practices and assumed religious superstition. They weren't superstitions. They were resource management. Overfish an area, catches decline. Implement Rawi, populations recover. The Maori had discovered sustainable harvesting through trial and error, then encoded it in cultural practice. Some European observers recorded these practices with anthropological curiosity. Few recognized them as conservation science that Europe wouldn't formally develop for another century. When civilization arrived, missionaries arrived in the 1820s with salt beef, ship's biscuits, and flour. They were eager to save the Maori from nutritional ignorance. Within months, those same missionaries were suffering from scurvy while the Maori, who fed them, remained healthy. The civilized diet was literally killing the people who brought it. But European foods carried the weight of cultural superiority. Wheat flour, sugar, and salted meat were markers of progress. Traditional Maori foods were rebranded as primitive, even as health outcomes declined among those who abandoned them. Land confiscation eliminated cultivated areas. European animals disrupted bird populations. Commercial fishing competed with traditional harvesting. Within 2 generations, much of the sophisticated food knowledge the Maori had developed was being lost. Young Maori growing up in European-style towns didn't learn traditional harvesting, preservation, or preparation methods. The knowledge faded. The irony was brutal. Europeans arrived thinking they'd teach nutrition to struggling people. Instead, they dismantled a food system more sophisticated and sustainable than their own, then wondered why health problems increased. Modern validation. In 2019, nutritional scientists at Auckland University analyzed the traditional Maori diet against modern health guidelines. It exceeded recommendations in 14 of 15 nutritional categories. The diet Europeans dismissed as primitive would today be sold as a premium health plan. Sufficient protein from fish and birds. Complex carbohydrates from kamara and root vegetables. Vitamins from diverse plant foods. Omega-3 fatty acids from seafood. Fiber from vegetables. Minimal processed foods. Modern nutritionists design meal plans trying to achieve what the Maori had developed through centuries of observation. Today, there's a revival movement. Maori communities are reclaiming traditional food practices, not just for cultural reasons, but because the food science was genuinely superior. The hangi is being recognized as legitimate cooking technology. Underground cooking preserves nutrients better than many modern methods. It's energy efficient. It scales beautifully. High-end restaurants now use hangi methods because the results are superior to conventional cooking. Food scientists are researching traditional preservation techniques that maintain nutritional value better than industrial processing. Agricultural researchers study Kamara cultivation methods for sustainable farming insights. The primitive practices were actually more environmentally sound than industrial agriculture. The real surprise: what the Maori really ate wasn't primitive subsistence. It was sophisticated food culture built on centuries of accumulated knowledge about ecology, seasonal variations, nutritional needs, food safety, and resource sustainability. They'd solved problems of nutrition and food security through practical science that European settlers initially couldn't recognize as science at all. European observers saw people without European tools and assumed backwardness. They missed the sophistication because it didn't look like European sophistication. The surgeon who watched that Maori warrior lift an impossible weight eventually understood. The strength didn't come from superior genetics or luck. It came from superior nutrition developed through superior food science. The Maori weren't ahead of their time. Europeans were behind theirs. Sometimes the most advanced food science isn't in laboratories and factories. Sometimes it's in traditional practices that understood nutrition and sustainability before those became academic disciplines. European settlers arrived expecting to teach nutrition to struggling people. Instead, they found a food culture that made their own look inadequate. The surprise wasn't what the Maori ate. It was how much better they understood food than the Europeans who thought themselves superior. That surgeon wrote in his journal, dated March 1823. "I came to New Zealand believing I understood nutrition. I leave knowing I understood nothing at all.